Hi, my name is Tim. Welcome to my podcast. Today I'll be explaining my use of the Marxist lens on Omar El-Akkad's novel American War and summarizing my thesis, evidence, and arguments that were derived from this lens. Firstly, what is the Marxist literary lens? The Marxist literary lens is a way of viewing literature in media by focusing on things that Marxist philosophy focuses on, such as class struggle, classism, exploitation, economic inequality, who has power, among others. However, notice that all of these have economic basis, which is characteristic of Marxist philosophy. I'll explain Marxist philosophy, which is the origin of Marxist literary lens, in more detail in the next episode. I chose to use the Marxist lens to analyze American War because as I was reading the novel, although on the surface it deceptively appeared to be a novel only about the horrors of war, this is obvious from the imagery of the novel. However, if one delves into the cause of these horrors, it always goes back to an economic reason, specifically one caused by capitalism. For instance, as stated on page 107, soldiers in the novel are only motivated by wages to fight the war. Therefore, it is the poverty of a class, the proletariat class, and not nationalism that motivates them to fight. Or on page 360, in which Atlanta is described in a way that exemplifies class division. The proletariat and bourgeoisie live in dramatically different conditions, with the proletariat living in terrible ones and bourgeoisie in great ones, and they're separated by a literal wall of buildings. Impoverished people die on the battlefield to earn money, and on the home front, the impoverished live in terrible conditions while the rich stay in gated mansions. Clearly, this novel is criticizing capitalism, with critiques consistent with Karl Marx's critique of capitalism in the Communist Manifesto. Since nearly every problem in the American War seemed to have an economic basis that was caused by capitalism, I decided to use the Marxist lens to interpret its meaning in the deepest form. Specifically, how capitalism destroys individuals and families in society through how it corrupts authoritative figures, exploits vulnerable people, and promotes continuing warfare. This is evidenced by how capitalism causes the corruption of authoritative figures, which is seen in the inequality of treatment due to bribery of camp staff, which is shown on page 215, or the moral corruption of Albert Gaines as he exposes his compatriots to the enemy for his own benefit, which is evidenced on page 430. And finally, disloyalty in soldiers in search for their self-aggrandizement, which is evidenced on page 364. Secondly, the exploitation of vulnerable people is seen in how capitalism causes inequality in the living and working conditions of people in Atlanta, which is evidenced on page 360. Next, Gaines's exploitation of Surratt for his own interests in waging the war, which is evidenced on page 267. And in Karina's unreliable wages that are given out by her bourgeois superiors, which is shown on page 275. Finally, the continuation of war is caused by how America prolongs a civil war by releasing a bioweapon rather than negotiating peace, which is shown on page 149. By how people fight the war for wages, shown on page 107, and how the bourgeoisie empire wants to prolong the American Civil War to remove their competitor, which is stated on page 152. It is clear that American War seeks to critique capitalism by showing how it ruins the lives of individuals and families. Thank you, and that will be all.